The message is going to be called Deceptive Prosperity. And what I'm going to talk about, the core thing I wanted to talk about is I want to talk about our focus on wickedness, our focus on the people that are wickedly and perhaps in leadership, not just in our nation but also worldwide, the people of influence, and us as Christians spending lots of time trying to decipher what everyone's doing. And I'm not saying we shouldn't pay attention. I'm not saying we shouldn't study. I'm not saying we shouldn't read. I'm not saying we shouldn't be paying attention to the political landscape that's happening. Absolutely we should. And be involved and speak our mind. So I'm not in any way saying that we shouldn't be doing that, but there's a deceptive prosperity to the fact that when we look at what government leaders and people worldwide are doing, and they're colluding perhaps, and some of it's conspiracy, some of it's not conspiracy, some of it's very real, maybe some of it's a portion of the two. But as Christians, we get we get obsessed with it, and we get focused on the strength and prosperity of everything that's going on in the world, and we're not paying attention to what the Lord is saying. We're not seeking God in the secret place. We're focused on what everybody's doing and on what the wicked are doing, and the prosperity of the wicked and the deception that comes with that, in thinking that somehow or another that they are in a position of strength and victory, even though that's not really the case. And so I want to read to you a scripture. I'm going to share a few things, and then I'm going to jump right off of here, so I won't be on for very long. And then it'll be up later if somebody wants to watch it. Psalm 73, 2 and 3. This is David speaking. He says, "But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped. For I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." David had grown weary in his struggles. He was going through his own personal struggles, his own personal fight, constantly having to fight and wage war and under attack, and it seemed like he was under attack from all these different places at the same time. And he got weary of it, and he looks over at the wicked. He looks over at the people that don't seek God. He looks over at the people that don't love the Lord. He looks over at the people that don't seem to really be they don't care about God at all. They mock God, maybe even they speak ill of God, and they're prospering in their wickedness and in their violence and all that stuff. And he says, and he says these words. He says, "My steps nearly slipped." So so David's admitting, I almost stumbled and my steps nearly slipped. So he's saying, I fell. I nearly spilled out. I nearly gave up. I nearly made a mistake and forsook godliness. He stepped out. I almost just stepped out of my godly character. I almost just cast off restraint. I almost gave up on trying to please the Lord. I almost laid it down. I almost started to slip and almost started to stumble because I was focused on the prosperity of the boastful. I was focused on what everybody else was doing, on what the wicked were doing, and how it seemed like they were just violent and godless and angry and wicked, and they prospered in all that they did. And I focused on that, and because I focused on that, I almost slipped, and I almost stumbled. So this is continuing down the Psalm 73:7. He says, "Their eyes bulge with abundance, and they have more than the heart could wish." They had more than the heart could wish. So he's saying, man, they got so much money, and doesn't that just, when you sit there and you look at politicians and you find out, they made a backdoor deal and they had 7 million and 3 million and 10 million and 30 million. You hear all these big numbers and you're sitting there going, man, I'm sitting here just trying to go to work and just trying to pay my bills and put a little bit of money in savings. And these guys are, wickedly colluding all over the world, and there's millions of dollars and there's corruption, and you're focused on that. And you're focused on those things, and it really just can vex you. And he's saying, this is what I was focused on. But as the people of God, we often focus on these things, right? The injustices, the power, the abuses of power, the prosperity of those that are in positions of power, strength and political influence. We're just focusing on that. Our minds are on it. We're obsessing on it. We're reading article after article after article after article, posting about it. We're angry. Our emotions are stirred. We're perhaps in the flesh and not focusing on the presence of God, not focusing on the one who our help comes from, on our Lord, our Savior, our Messiah, our God, our King. So we may not admit it, but we see ourselves as grasshoppers in their sight. we see ourselves as being vulnerable to them, as being weak before them, as being in a position, as perhaps even having fear of what these people might do that might affect us, to the point where it becomes paralyzing, to the point where we're trying to figure out what they're going to do next. So we begin to obsess and look at all these things, and we're trying to figure out which one is the mark of the beast, and this thing's coming to the end of the world, and we're just trying to anticipate it because we're so worried about it, because this is all we can think about. And it begins to stir fear, emotions, anger, and we're in a different realm. Not to say that we shouldn't be paying attention to all those things, but they have to be compartmentalized and positioned within our heart in such a way that we are not overly focused and giving where we're just afraid. What is President Biden going to do, or Joe Biden, or whatever you want to call it? What is he going to do with the executive orders? Yeah, it's an outrage. Yeah, it's wrong. But at the same time, are we afraid? Do we not recognize God's ability to set a king up and cause a king to fall down? Do we not recognize that, even like when I shared this a couple days ago about Athaliah? It was the daughter of Jezebel, and she had usurped the authority. She took the kingship. She was basically the queen of Israel for a short time before God came in and judged her. She had unrightfully put herself in a position where she was not supposed to be. But God himself brought about what needed to take place. She wound up dying. And she was removed, and a man of that lineage was placed back in that position. And God put everything, restored order. God did what it is he needed to do, because God is God. And God reigns supreme. He is on the circle of the earth. We're talking about Yahweh here. I mean, so we've got to be focused on who God is, who goes above every authority, so that every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess, right? Every other authority is submitted to God, or is underneath the authority of the Lord. So let me read to you 11 through 13, and say also still in Psalms 73. And they say, how does God know? And is there knowledge in the Most High? Behold, these are ungodly, who are always at ease. It seems like they're always at ease. They're always doing well. They increase their riches, and surely I have cleansed my heart in vain and washed my hands in innocence, is what David's saying. So he's sitting here going, man, they don't think God even is paying attention. They're mocking God. They think, man, God doesn't even know what we're doing. Who's God? We're doing what we want to do here. And David said, he got to the point in verse 13 where he says, surely I have cleansed my heart in vain. Surely I have washed my hands for nothing. In other words, I've tried to keep the commands of the Lord, but why am I doing this? Why do I keep my heart pure before the Lord? Why do I worship God and try to adhere to the words and the commands of the Lord? Why do I keep the law if all I'm going to do is be in this place where I'm constantly going through things and I see the wicked doing so well? Why do I do this? I must be doing this in vain. I may as well just cast off restraint and go do what they do, because I'm probably better at it. I think I'm smarter at it. I think I can. If it comes to being in war, I can be slick and do all these things and be manipulative. I could find a way to obtain wealth in the realm of the wicked if I wanted to be among them. Surely I've kept my heart pure in vain, is what David's saying. But he's struggling. He's in the midst of the pressure cooker, the struggle and the misperception, and focusing too hard on the deceptive prosperity of the wicked, and not focused on God. So here we go, and then we're going to bring it down to the end here. So this is what he's saying. So he realized he was on the very verge of stumbling, of slipping, and he says, "Look, I was there. I was right there. I was almost going to make a mistake." And then you get to Psalm 73, 17 through 22. This is really quick reading here. He says, "Until I went into the sanctuary of God, until I got into the presence of the Lord," in verse 17, "then I understood their end. Then I understood how this goes. And surely you will set them in slippery places, and you cast them down to destruction." Verse 19, "Oh, how they are brought to desolation as in a moment." In other words, a suddenly moment. And God will suddenly can come along and make things right, restore order, position things the way God intended things to be. God can suddenly, in a moment, make things the way that God intended things to be. So we have to keep our focus on the Most High. We have to keep our focus on the one that trumps it all. So it says they are utterly consumed with terrors. Verse 20, as a dream when one awakes, so Lord, when you awake, you shall despise their image. You will deal with them and confront them head on, God. Surely when it's time, you will do it. But I had to get into the presence of the Lord to see it. I had to get into the presence of the flow of the Spirit to see it. I had to get into the sanctuary of our God. I had to get out of the flesh and get out of my emotions and stop being overly consumed with what I'm hearing and reading and all of the accusations and the theories and what I think is this coming to the end of the world. All of the things that consume our minds politically. And we had to get into the sanctuary of our God and set all that aside. And you got into the sanctuary of our God, he says. And then I began to recognize their end. I began to recognize where God comes, how God's going to move. I began to recognize how things are really positioned and who God is in all of this. And the fact that I can rest and trust in what God is doing on the earth. That God is not powerless. God has not become unable to perform his promises on the earth. So let me finish this last two verses and then that'll be it. Then he says, he says that in verse 21, thus my heart is grieved and I was vexed in my mind. Verse 22, because I was so foolish and ignorant. Lord, I was like a beast before you. Let me read that again. He says, thus I was in my heart, I was grieved and I was vexed in my mind. He says, I was so foolish and ignorant. He says, I was like a beast before you, because he was in his fleshly thinking. He was in his fleshly mind. He wasn't in the spirit. He wasn't looking at things through that prophetic flow that he's used to when he worships the Lord. He gets out his harp and began to worship and write psalms in that prophetic flow. That he wasn't looking at things through that lens. He was looking at things through the fleshly lens. He was looking at things through fear, looking at things through what seems to be injustice, what is perceived to be the wicked, deceptively being blessed by God, or being blessed, period, and walking in prosperity, but because he had not got into the presence of God. But he says, once I got into the sanctuary of God, I felt foolish. Once I got into the sanctuary of God, I felt ignorant. Once I got into the sanctuary of God, all of a sudden the revelation came to me that my thinking was wrong. And all I'm saying today is that we need to be a people that recognize and have peace in our hearts, have joy in our hearts, and recognize that God is able to come along and make a way where it seems like there's no way at all. When you look at, I'll leave you with this. Ponder when King Nebuchadnezzar had decided that he was going to rise up and defy God. And he actually, did not recognize the Lord. That God came along and judged him. And that's what God said. He goes, you didn't recognize me as God. I caused you to rise to power. I gave you your strength. You thought it was your own. Because you thought it was your own, you did not recognize me or glorify me as God. Because you chose not to do that, his mind left him. So God caused his mind to leave him, where he became like an animal that was grazing the grass, not wearing any clothes. For 7 years, he was utterly humiliated and became as a foolish one, became as a beast on the ground, because God came along and judged. Am I saying that's what's going to happen to Biden? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we need to recognize that God is able to do whatever needs to be done to make the ledger correct, to make things jive, to bring things to justice, to bring things to balance the scales, to make sure that the weight of the scales is just and right. So God is able to do these things, and God will do these things, because God is the keeper of the scales. God is the keeper of justice. God is the keeper, and he is the judge, and he is the one that comes along and makes things right. So we need to be a people that understand that where our help comes from is from heaven. We need to have peace in that. We need to love God, and we need to look at all of these governmental things through the lens that God is in control. Not that we are afraid, not that we are grasshoppers in our own sight, grasshoppers in their sight, that we're meaningless, powerless people, but we have the ability to petition God and to fill up the bowls of heaven and see God move on the earth and even move in our nation and see a release of the Spirit on this land and see God quicken the hearts of people and release his power, his dunamis power on this land. We have the ability to petition God and unify in the Spirit. And so he's saying we need to be a people that get into the sanctuary. We need to be a people that get into the mind of Christ, the mind of the Spirit. And that we are people that as we speak to the things of the government, when we speak to the thing, we do it with wisdom. We do it as people of God. We do this as Christians. And with the right heart and the right spirit, not freaking out, not going crazy, but actually having the heart of God in us and not understanding what's really going on. I bless you with that. You guys have a wonderful day. I just wanted to throw that out there and encourage you. Bless you all. Bye.